like it. You want a podcast like it? Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. Just podcast like it. Podcast like it's 1999. Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it's 1999.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Like It's 1999, the podcast where we talk about the films of 1999 from Saddam Hussein's bunker here in 2021. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny Neibart.
And I'm Phil Iskov.
And with us today, direct from the pages of Entertainment Weekly magazine, Darren Franich. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm honored to be the Spike Jonze of this group. We're driving.
You're the ice. I was going to say you're the Ice Cube, but Phil is obviously the Ice Cube.
Yeah. I'm okay. I'm okay being the fourth person in Three Kings as we drive over the border into who knows what. Really, this is going to be an interesting movie to talk about.
I am obviously the Wahlberg. I'm. Everyone knows that. Phil, you could be the Clooney, which makes sense because your favorite show is ER, and
it's one of them, yeah, for sure. And he was shooting ER while making this movie.
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Darren, thank you so much again for joining. As I said to you before, this podcast is occasionally an Entertainment Weekly appreciation podcast. Darren is, well known to podcast audiences as one of the top drafters on Screen Drafts, a podcast Phil and I are going to be going on tonight. I just want to kind of set up where Phil and my minds are right now. We're doing a Jerry Bruckheimer draft tonight. We have each watched 25 Jerry Bruckheimer films.
So many.
And in the middle stuck a Three Kings, which is Jerry Bruckheimer, but with a bullet going through and bile filling up the hole. So our brains are kind of like really. This is a weird thing to watch in the middle.
Yeah.
Of a lot of Bruckheimer films. But so I do also just say that because as I've been watching these Bruckheimer films, it occurred to me that I was not a Bruckheimer fan initially. My pop culture intake basically went sports, WWE. And then around the time I was like 11 or 12, I found Entertainment Weekly. And Entertainment Weekly radicalized me. Now, Darren, I assume you've been reading it your whole life, right?
Yes. Very similar, except before I wasn't watching sports, so I actually had nothing before Entertainment Weekly.
Nothing.
It wasn't so much. It was not so much radicalized. It was like creation of entire personality, starting in like the mid to late 90s. Yeah.
So you understand, and I don't think people who didn't grow up in this era understands this about Time Warner magazine, but you understand that the Michael Bays and the Jerry Bruckheimers did not get respect from that magazine. So no. I went. It occurred to me as I was doing the Bruckheimer watch. I went for being sports, wrestling to directly to auteurs, like jumping over all the populist shit. And directly to, would sooner go to New York City. I remember, it was 1996 because it was Sling Blade. I went to New York City an hour, dragged my dad to go see Sling Blade because Entertainment Weekly told me to.
It's a good movie.
It's an amazing movie, but which is to say, I was more in the Three Kings wheelhouse in 99 that I was coming back. And when I let my brain slow down, and I stopped caring so much about the world, I could really appreciate your Bays and your all the Bruckheimer team. So, long way to say, I haven't seen this movie since 2001, and I liked it a lot back then. I have a lot to say this time around, but before I keep going, Darren, what's your experience with this movie? Where were you in '99? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, one of the reasons why I'm glad to be on this podcast is I'm very much of the generation where 1999 and specifically 1999 movies was the most formative cultural period for me. I can remember seeing Three Kings in theaters because I believe it came out I think it was the Friday before Fight Club. And I saw both those movies opening night.
They were both October. Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to recall how I got in because I believe by that point in the year, the local theaters have been cracking down a little bit on 14-year-olds seeing R-rated movies. I actually think maybe with Three Kings, it might have been an example where because it got a good review from Entertainment Weekly, I was able to convince like my parents to buy me a ticket on, this is good for me cultural grounds. Same way I convinced my mom to take me and my friends to go see Go, which is a whole other story. But I just really remember the first viewing of Three Kings on the big screen as like really kind of mind expanding. I hadn't seen other David O. Russell movies. This movie, the way that it was made, the kind of material that it's covering was very different from the action movies I'd seen at that time, very different even from, the kind of specter of Vietnam, both historically and Vietnam movies really hovers over this movie. And this was even a lot different than, that genre that I'd kind of experienced to that point. And I kind of walked out of the theater thinking, wow, like, this is what all movies are going to be like now. This is the new Hollywood. Yeah. And that, didn't necessarily happen. I think a lot of people who remember movies in 1999 had similar experiences like that with other movies. That for me was, Three Kings was so central to my experience of a great movie year. It feels to me like a movie that has actually lost quite a bit of cultural steam. Like it doesn't surprise me that you guys are doing this movie pretty later on after a lot of other films. I think for a lot of people, this is not one that stands out as much as it did at the time. I don't know if you guys feel that way, but for me at the time, this was right up there with the other great films of the year all the way.
I totally. It's interesting. This film being later in the run was somewhat intentional in the sense that it's one of my favorite films of '99. I have not seen it in quite some time, but it has held up for me. But I would also say too that it does feel like its appreciation has evolved and changed over the years. I think a lot of that has to do with, quite frankly, David O. Russell's, the way he is perceived for good and for bad over the past 20 years or so has certainly added to it. I would also argue, too, that as I was watching this film, what kind of hit me as well is there are a lot of movies about Iraq and Afghanistan and the war in the Middle East. And I don't necessarily know that a lot of them have really punctured outside of a bubble of sorts. It doesn't feel like I know that there was a lot, some people really like Jarhead, and Jarhead had that kind of steam before its release. It's kind of evaporated a little bit. It might hold up. I haven't watched it since it came out, but
it does not.
Okay.
Jarhead doesn't exist.
Yeah,
but
sure.
This movie does.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, Darren, to take your point about us doing this later in the run, not to be a total jerk, it's the opposite reason. We looked at this movie as one of the tentpoles of '99. And when we talked about the year in the beginning, it was when we always highlighted as this came out in '99. So what we've tried to do is, spread them out over the course of what would inevitably be a 5-year podcast. I think that this movie has been somewhat bulletproof when it comes to the David O. Russell thing, where David O. Russell has been looked at, more and more as a tyrant and as someone who's not fit to be a leader of people, someone who might be a little pretentious, someone who might not have the sensitivity to deal with certain topics. But this movie seems to have existed outside of that as just a great film that he made before he got crazy with power or blinded by Hollywood or blinded by celebrity or whatever it was. I'm here to tell you I disagree. I think this movie's not that great. And I think this movie raises a lot of red flags when it comes to David O. Russell and the kind of filmmaker he is and what he values and how he ultimately views all the things we're scared of: imperialism, colonialism, oppression, white supremacy, centering stories on Americans. Like the last one in particular is not anywhere near a fatal flaw. That doesn't bother me in the slightest. But what it does do, and this is why I think I'm really kind of, I like this movie. I think this movie has a lot going for it. But what turned me off is is the way, in the end of the day, it was a redemption arc for 4 American soldiers who are emblematic of our imperialist crusades and never really stopped until they were forced to. So that,
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I do hear that, and you know, I do want to be clear that, you know, watching it yesterday was the most kind of clear-eyed I've been about the movie probably, you know, ever, right? We evolve as people as we watch movies, or if we rewatch them, we're different people when we watch them later in life. I'm not who I was in 99, and I'm not who I was in, I don't know, 2010 when I watched it last, or whenever it was. I think that this movie stands out in the David O. Russell oeuvre because it's still sort of his only studio film, if we're being completely honest. I mean, I think that, Joy is sort of a Fox movie, I guess. But, I mean, do we want to talk about Joy?
I think The Fighter is a studio film. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I guess this film feels... it feels the most kind of effective for me as an actual storytelling, like a film that tells a story cleanly. I'm not a big fan of The Fighter. I understand why people like The Fighter. It feels like the 5 screenwriters that it has working on it, to me personally, it just doesn't feel particularly cohesive. And I also, as we'll find out, not the biggest fan of Mark Wahlberg. So these are all kind of things that are against The Fighter for me personally. I think Wahlberg is great in this film because he's weaponized. I think that perhaps David O. Russell understands Mark Wahlberg better than any filmmaker in terms of how to use his strengths and, you know, and weaknesses and what have you. But I want to kind of come back to what you were saying, Kenny, in terms of the imperialistic, you know, perception or idea. I don't think you're wrong. I don't think that this film is, but I also don't think that this film is necessarily condoning that behavior. I mean, I think that for me, what I thought was interesting about this film was, as far as I can, and I haven't seen every film about Iraq, but this film feels like one of the first films to actually be like, we fucked up in Iraq. Like, our intentions for going into this war were wrong, and we shouldn't have played this the way that we did. But I don't know if, I don't know if you agree with that or not. In terms of the redemption of their characters, I mean, yeah, they're for. I mean, I don't. They're kind of some selfish guys, and they pull themselves out of it.
I think he wants it both ways. I think the first half of the movie is kind of mesmerizing for all the reasons you're saying, and I think he wants it both ways.
Okay.
And maybe that's Warner Brothers, or maybe that's, you know, I don't know. But my sense is, at the end of the day, most of David O. Russell movies, with the exception of his best movie, I Heart Huckabees, tax on an ending that makes it a little more palatable to audiences than I think the rest of the movie intends.
Well,
and by the ending, are you suggesting the saving of the prisoners, or are you saying the epilogue in terms of, not to jump around? But,
more the saving of the prisoners.
Okay.
It's more that they have decided to elevate human life over this quest for personal enrichment, which says something to me about Americans.
Sure.
That I don't think the rest of the film is saying.
I first of all, I want to say that, like, we're not, we're all pretty close to the same assessment of this film. Just to be clear, I think
we are too.
I think that I might be giving it a little bit more slack than you guys to a certain degree, and I'll get into why I think that in a second. But to your point here, that I don't actually think that they're all uniformly what you're saying, Kenny. Like, I think that what's interesting about the film is how the 4 of them actually, in a pretty nuanced way, change their perceptions about things as the film progresses. I think that I remember midway through the film, when before the firefight, where Wahlberg is just like, dude, we got our fucking money. Like, let's get the fuck out of here. Like, we're good to go. And Spike is on the fence because he obviously wants to agree with everything that Mark Wahlberg says. Clooney clearly does not want to allow what's about to transpire. and same with Ice Cube's character. I think that there's a little bit more nuance here than you might be giving credit to. But I want to just quickly, sorry.
I don't want to give it credit for nuance because I don't think that it's a hard argument to make. The point you're making in the context of the film works perfectly. I understand that these are four characters who are treated like typical protagonists, starting from a place of being flawed and ending in a place where they've overcome their flaws to some extent.
They've learned something, hopefully.
They've learned something, yes. I think because of what they represent.
Yeah.
What is that saying about America's imperial activities at large if these four guys all learn something and get better? Is it saying that there's a good version of imperialism if we're just better at it? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there's not. I'm just saying it's an open question. This actually reminds me a lot of the promising young woman debate that is happening right now. Because this movie could only exist when it existed. Because my sense with Promising Young Woman is it can only exist right now, right? That in 3 years, the cultural conversation will be different. And 3 years ago, the cultural conversation would have been different. And I mean, I feel like maybe we don't give away too much about that movie right now because we're in the midst of Oscar season, whatever. But there is a having it both ways at the end of that film that I think leaves a bad taste in some people's mouths. And I think some of that is because people don't exactly know what to do with that issue in this moment. What is satisfying for that issue in this moment? So what concerns me about Three Kings as a viewer is at some point it felt like they lost track of what he was doing in terms of, every American butterfly that flaps its wings in the Middle East sets off a tsunami throughout the rest of the region, and shrunk it down, imploded it to only be about these three guys who survived, to only be about these three guys and the lesson they learned, and didn't even bring forth in any kind of helpful way. One of them became a stunt coordinator.
Cool.
It was also navel gazing, right? Because then, in the end of the day, the reason they didn't get punished was because Nora Dunn showed the world that they were the good guys, and the thing I've learned is in the last 20 years, world doesn't give a shit. World doesn't give a shit what the media says. So, all right, but long way of saying I wouldn't have shrunk this down to a story about the three guys at the end the way they did when you have all these people who are dead and devastated because of what they did, what these three specific guys did in search of gold, in search of Kuwaiti gold, not even Iraqi gold, in search of Kuwaiti gold that they were going to steal. And then got to, live out their lives in a happy way. That's just, I hate shitting on America, but that's just so American.
I mean, I guess the question, so I want to back up a little bit as well on the David O. Russell thing, because I think it's worth talking about how sort of idiosyncratic and esoteric and what he quite frankly got away with at this time in studio filmmaking, right? I mean, this is a guy who's had two films previous to this, both of them independent comedies. I think Flirting with Disaster is still a pretty funny movie, even if
I like it too.
Spanking the Monkey I haven't seen in a million years, so I can't tell you if that holds
up. It's the best. It's his best movie. It's a piece.
I think that he's given, I don't want to say a blank check, but he's kind of given a blank check here. He's given almost $50 million by Warner Brothers. And he really runs with it. I think that this film, as I said, I think on a storytelling perspective, taking away the completely valid things that you guys are saying about the ending and about what it's saying about imperialism, on a pure storytelling, it's the cleanest, straightest line, I think, of his films outside of The Fighter. And I think that it has heart, it's got brains, it's got a great cast, it's got fantastic production value, it's got all those things. And it's a high wire active tone that I think for the most part, it lands. which is really, really
I agree
tough.
completely.
So basically, at the beginning of the film, and I remember this when I saw it in the theater. It's not on the DVDs. It's not on anything that it's not on HBO Max now. But there was a disclaimer that said, explaining sort of the quote unquote strange look of the film. And I'll explain basically the vibrant color is due to the fact that they used Ektachrome slide transparency film instead of standard film stock, and that they bleach bypassed it essentially. So it made the blacks a lot deeper. And the silver halide is completely opaque. It's a truer black, and it costs more money to make those prints. So twofold, you had to explain it because people were going to think that the film looked fucking weird, and it costs you more money. So both of those things are sort of like, why are we doing it? Now, personally speaking, Newton Thomas Sigel, who shot the film, I think the film is gorgeous. I love the way the film looks. So I'm thrilled that they did it. But
Especially
I'm also
for
just
a film
like,
shot in Arizona.
Right. But I'm also just like, if you're Warner Brothers, you've got to be thinking, what the fuck have I got myself into? That this guy wants to spend way more money on just the cinematography alone. But I respect that he did it. It just costs more money.
Yeah, I mean, in my memory, the look of Three Kings was kind of much imitated in the years after. Just kind of the idea of connoting wartime action realism with that kind of style. Yeah. But rewatching it again, even on HBO Max, in what I assume is a visually butchered version, because anything with that kind of, as you say, deepest of all blacks visual stuff doesn't really translate to streaming. It still feels pretty singular to me, and I think it's probably for the reasons you're describing, all the technical stuff that you just said. But what jumps out at me even more, just to kind of go a little bit behind the scenes, is the idea of them doing that kind of technological risk to a certain extent, with what I gather was still kind of your classic David O. Russell, let's tear it up each morning and improvise everything.
That's what it seems like.
I mean, clearly, that kind of model, I think it has its positives and its negatives, and there's famous behind the scenes stuff attached to the movie, but
which we should talk about at some point as well.
Yeah, we'll talk about it at some point. But even to pick kind of a later scene from the movie, when they're kind of trying to convince the guys to help them, and they're talking about George Bush, and it's like so wild and funny, and then they say that they'll pay the guys, like that feels pretty unique to David O. Russell's style. That kind of feels like, okay, we've organized a whole studio production here, and now I'm gonna just tear up the pieces of the script, and we're just gonna go wild for a while. And I really do respect that. It does make the movie feel a lot different, even from the films that maybe were influenced by it, either in tone or in style. I think, again, the more I talk about this, the more I am coming around to saying, like, it still feels pretty singular to me. Sure. Even compared to some of the other really influential movies that you guys have talked about on the podcast that were were imitated one way or the other over the years.
Singular's a really good way to put it.
I totally agree. I think that I just the way the film opens, it literally opens with just the sound of a soldier walking, an oddly high angle shot over Wahlberg, while he calls over his shoulder saying, "Are we still shooting people? Are we still shooting people?" And then a bunch of like weird whip pans and crash zooms into some soldiers that are kind of like fucking around. Like the energy right out of the gate is, as you said, singular. Like it's unlike any war film I think I've seen, quite frankly. Yeah. And part of it has to do with all of those weird sort of like intangibilities in this particular war at this particular time in American history, where it just feels so odd, like and humorous, but also like someone dies in that first scene. Like Mark Wahlberg shoots a guy and kills him. And then everyone kind of takes a picture with him, and no one really thinks that they were going to see anybody get shot
before Abu Ghraib. Yeah,
it's all just it's and then it crashes into basically a music video for a good 2 minutes, Very strong.
which ends with like all these army guys are drinking and they're celebrating and they're singing along, and like that scene more or less ends with like Spike Jonze's character like screaming and pointing a gun at Mark Wahlberg's character in like enthusiasm. Like I don't know. I think that's the stuff where I think the movie is really tapping into something pretty bold by it's not stamping that stuff with "this is bad" in a way that I think even some really sharp films in the 2000s felt the need to do that. I do think that, that whole opening is just so exuberant and wild, and I kind of think that it sets the tone totally. And the fact that even it kind of, that first scene you're describing, Phil, it ends on that freeze frame of Wahlberg looking disturbed and sad. I mean, that's one of the best Mark Wahlberg moments he's ever had, really. I don't know. I think that to get back to what you guys were saying earlier, talk about the use of the blunt instrument of Wahlbergdom is used very well in this movie.
It is. He does something. I feel like Mark Wahlberg has like two gears, which is sort of alpha male, that, or talking in a high pitch, looking for earnestness, is sort of the two things that he does. And in this movie, they perfectly, and by David O. Russell perfectly weaponizes that earnest quality in him, the desire in theory to be a better person. Or at least just sort of an understanding of things, or this kind of sweetness that exists in him, that works really well in this movie. And also kind of, I don't know, it's just the Wahlberg persona is kind of deconstructed in this movie in a way that I really appreciate.
Yeah, before he even really had a persona. It's crazy. That's the prophetic stuff in the movie that's really interesting. Yeah, for sure.
I did a lot of thinking about Wahlberg during this movie, needless to say. And, as listeners know, I have a history with the man. So it should be said he was very nice. But that being said, I'm trying to think about Wahlberg in this period and what he brought. And here's the thing that I want to kind of get out about the Wahlberg persona that really was born in Boogie Nights. Mm-hmm. He is a white male at the top, tippity top of the food chain. And what he plays that I think is so true to life that I don't think a lot of people understand is that when you're a white guy at the top, tippity top of the food chain, when you have all of Maslow's hierarchy of needs figured out, right? You don't have to worry about fucking anything. There's really no reason to be a fucking dick, which he's not. In Boogie Nights, any other actor or any other character, any other archetype, I think would have fucking gay bashed Scotty, right? His protection of Scotty, inclusion of Scotty, niceness towards Scotty was so weird in the context of a movie and so true to life from what I've seen from people who are at the top, tippity top like him, right? The way he treats Spike Jonze in this movie, the way it's not like he's like his protector. It's not like he's just not kicking him around. He's letting him hang around. That is real to me too. And I think the other guy who's picked this up is Channing Tatum, who also kind of, lives in this, rarefied airspace. But almost any other character of this, or almost any other, and Paul Walker did this too really well, by the way, but almost any other actor who lives up here imbues some dickishness that I don't really think is real. I think those guys who operate at the top, who are dicks, generally are sidekicks. Generally are second in line, because if you're a dick, you have so much fucking pent up insecurity anyway. That's not a real thing. So I think, for me at least, what Mark Wahlberg brings to this movie, brings to Boogie Nights, brings to I Heart Huckabees, brings to some other things he's done throughout his career, I think The Fighter would count as well, is a true to life what's the word, portrayal of the alphas. I'm not even giving him too much credit for it, but I'm blown away by people who see that, because there's so much there's such a natural inclination among creative people who were not those people growing up to portray people at the top as jock bullies. But I don't think that's what they really are in general. I think there are people around them who are jock bullies.
I think that just to be a little bit clear about my feelings about Wahlberg, he is in some wonderful movies. He's in some of my favorite movies. I love Boogie Nights. I think that he'll be hard pressed to ever beat that in terms of just really showing the breadth of his talent. And
Orson Welles will never beat Citizen Kane. Right, what are you going to do when you knock it out of the park your rookie year? It is what it is. But
I want to kind of part of I think, for me anyway, Kenny, I don't know him as a person, and I'm happy to hear that he's a nice guy. I don't doubt it. And I think that the performances that work for me the most from Mark Wahlberg seem to tap into that. I think the performances that don't work for me from him are essentially the other 75% of his filmography.
Totally agree with you.
Are things that just are of very little interest to me. There's also this kind of puffed chest alpha male stuff that he sometimes does in the press. If I was on the plane on September 11th, I would have been able to stop it from happening. Stuff like that just makes me go like, all right. But it's worth noting here, because we're talking about Wahlberg, Clooney and Wahlberg do another film together as well. They do The Perfect Storm, which comes out the next year. And he was supposed to be Brad Pitt's character in the Ocean's films, but there was like a scheduling issue that couldn't happen. I'm thankful for that, because I love Brad Pitt in the Ocean's movies.
Me too.
And it's not to say that Clooney and Wahlberg wouldn't have had a similar kind of energy. They might very well have. But Brad is so effortlessly cool in those movies. And Wahlberg, for what it's worth, has to kind of work for that a little bit in a different way. And I'm not sure that energy would have been as much fun to watch.
Clooney and Wahlberg, to me, is like, that's one of the great Hollywood what ifs, because as you said, they did Three Kings, they did Perfect Storm. I can remember them giving interviews where they say, who knows, but they seemed like very invested in like, we are two guys who like each other, who want to keep making movies together. And then I don't quite know what happened, but it seems like that was that great period where like everyone was almost in Ocean's 11, and like there's like a whole other cast of people who were nearly playing all those characters, and then nothing in the Clooney Wahlberg collaboration since then. They left that all behind at the dawn of the 21st century.
I do wonder if a little bit of it has to do with, Clooney was a bigger star than Wahlberg at the time of Three Kings and at the time of Perfect Storm. But then at a certain point, Wahlberg has an ascension of his own, right? And I just, they weren't in the same sort of, like, I wonder if this was like Clooney taking Wahlberg under his wing a little bit.
I think it was.
You know what I mean?
So, he's got 10 years on him. I think it was. I think there was some of that. I think also like, they're two cool guys. And two cool guys who are kind of similar, right? Like, Brad Pitt is as cool as they come, but Brad Pitt sits at home and gets high all day long. That's not what Clooney and Wahlberg are. So they're two cool guys who I think get off on movies like Three Kings, get off on movies like The Perfect Storm. Yeah. And I think at some point, Clooney went deep into that Syriana world with Grant Heslov and decided, I'm going to do different shit.
Yeah.
Where, I think, again, knowing a little bit of Wahlberg and where his mentality is, like, number one, I think, is making good films people are going to love. And whether that's making Transformers or straight up like The Happening was an idea that like, I'm going to make a movie with M. Night Shyamalan because he makes movies people love and I can do that, right? I also think that he has a, as you said, this alpha male masculinity thing that's hard to shake, which puts him in a position where he's very often playing people in military and law enforcement or whatever. Sometimes you wind up in a movie with Scorsese where things go right for him, and sometimes you wind up making the fourth and fifth Transformer movies where people say, "What's going on with you?" And then
Fifth one's the
sometimes
best, man. Fifth one's the best. I'm here for it. Excalibur.
And then sometimes people really get him, like what he does really well. Like, we're talking about the David O. Russell stuff early on. They get it. Paul Thomas Anderson gets it. But like later in his career, Adam McKay got it.
Yep.
Daddy's Home got it. Like this thing that he does that can be used in a little bit of a different way, where he's a little more intimidating, a little less like, I'm going to put you under my wing and guide you to safety because I'm just a guy who gets shit done. That I think is valuable too. Like I even saw that movie because it's a kid-friendly movie with him and Rose Byrne, Insta Family.
Yes, Instant Family. Yeah.
It's very charming. He can play cool dad these days.
Can I just this is worth doing just for a quick second in terms of just seeing where he is in his career at this point. He does Boogie Nights in 97. He does the big hit in 98, and then in 99 he's got the big hit. Everyone's
a movie I like.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to rewatch it.
It's a gonzo ass movie.
Yeah, so The Corruptor and Three Kings are both in 99. We haven't done The Corruptor yet, but we'll be doing it soon, so we'll have another crack at Wahlberg. But he does The Yards and Perfect Storm in 2000. Then he does Planet of the Apes and Rockstar in 2001, and The Truth About Charlie in 2002. So right there, it's getting away from him. And people are sort of like, what's happening? And I think that Italian Job gets him back in people's good graces.
It does.
And that movie sort of re-solidifies him. He then does I Heart Huckabees, which, as you know, we should talk about that film, obviously. And then it's like Four Brothers, Invincible, Departed, Shooter. Like it's him. He gets his lane. He gets what's sort of working for him.
It's him making money.
And I totally agree with you, Kenny, that the other guys shows a different gear. It shows a sort of meta gear of being able to understand his persona.
I Heart Huckabees is really the first one that does that. Like,
but no one really sees that movie. But yes,
well, everyone's wrong and stupid.
They're wrong, but yeah. But I think that moment of Wahlberg, and again, as I say all of this, I don't hate the guy. I really don't, and I think his ability to understand himself and understand his persona kind of makes him unlike a lot of movie stars, because a lot of movie stars don't really want to do that deep dive and don't really want to, so anyway, that deconstruct themselves.
Do you know how he got this film? Are you aware of the letter he sent to David O. Russell?
Crazy.
So David O. Russell wanted Nick Cage, had cast Nick Cage.
Yeah.
And Clooney had read it first and like begged for it. And he's like, no. I'm not going with the guy from ER. So he wanted Nick Cage. He cast Nick Cage. Something happened with Nick Cage. I think he went and
he did Bringing Out the Dead.
Bringing Out the Dead, exactly. So can't say no to Scorsese. So all of a sudden it's open, and he writes David O. Russell a long letter and signed it George Clooney, TV star. So
yeah, there's also
that is your guy.
There's also a moment where apparently when they first meet, David O. Russell brings a video camera and like videotapes their first conversation or something along those lines. And apparently Clooney said to him, I better get the part because I don't want to be in a video for the making of Three Kings and not actually get the part. The Spike Jonze thing is also another thing on the list of David O. Russell pushing the boundaries of what he was capable of getting away with at the time. Warner Brothers had no interest in casting Spike Jonze, a guy who was a director. They
and Clooney didn't want to act
either.
Across from him. Yeah.
But so apparently David O. Russell would get on the phone with Spike Jonze and they would work on his accent while he's shooting Being John Malkovich. So like it's like this is all happening like concurrently, essentially.
They should have put that into adaptation. But
all of this is to say
with Nicolas Cage. Fucking A.
But Spike Jonze is fucking great in this movie, guys. Like I watched this performance.
He's amazing.
Yesterday, and I was just like, and he's also, he's great in Wolf of Wall Street in the scenes he has. He's great in Moneyball. He's very good on camera. He feels very real. It all just feels very genuine. And he is the comedic relief in this film, but it's done in a way that you're not laughing at him in a weird way. Like, it's a loving portrayal to some degree or another. He's got some great fucking jokes, and his delivery's spot on. And he's also the tragic character too. I mean, obviously comedic relief tends to be the character that dies so that we feel something, but I gotta say, he's just, I wish he acted more is really ultimately what I'm getting
He'll
at.
be very high on my short list for best supporting actor of 1999.
Yes.
But I think I assume it was him because I don't know how you write it or even think of it.
Yeah.
But the singing directly from Three Kings into Mercedes-Benz, that killed me. I was dead. That was too much. That's a level of brilliance I don't think exists.
The first 15 minutes of the movie, he has been so punchable. And then you get to that scene and he's singing that song, and it's just so beautiful. And I believe that scene actually was basically like what they set the trailer to, because it established why the movie was called Three Kings. So like that is one of my seminal memories of 1999 television, is the Three Kings trailer playing and Spike Jonze of all people being the one to kind of set the framework for the movie. From there, that's the kind of magic hour of the movie from there onwards, where just everything
totally
about it is going so right. I mean, even setting aside, we haven't really talked about the supporting cast of this movie.
Nora Dunn is fantastic.
Nora Dunn's fantastic.
Nora Dunn is amazing. This is a really early Cliff Curtis movie.
Yeah,
and he's obviously done so much stuff. Alia Shawkat as the little girl.
Yeah,
as the little girl.
And Judy Greer, a little Arrested Development reunion.
Yeah.
Judy Greer. Yeah, exactly. I mean, to talk about just like, compilation of talent all together in one place. Maybe the best Jamie Kennedy movie next to Scream and Scream 2 also.
Correct.
One of my undercover favorite parts of the movie is when Jamie Kennedy is clearly trying to kiss Nora Dunn, and she just pushes his head away. Which I understand because Nora Dunn looks so hot in this movie. It's crazy.
She really does. Yeah.
She's got such a hot thing going on. Maybe I'm just such a misogynist, but like I'm blown away.
Can I, Kenny, you mentioned earlier a couple minutes ago about the sort of feeling like lightning in a bottle moments, like what's written and what's not written, which is definitely a David O. Russell trademark. I want to just talk for a quick second here about the writing of this film, because it's worth unpacking for a second. Basically, John Ridley writes this script as an experiment to see how fast he could write and sell a script. I'm rolling my eyes. If you could see, I'm rolling my eyes. It took.
Why are you rolling your eyes?
I don't necessarily have a problem with the experiment of the idea of how quickly you can write a script. It's how quickly I can sell a script that has an arrogance that makes me kind of want to retch.
I think the experiment, as far as I could tell, maybe I'm wrong, was how fast I could write it. He happened to sell it. He happened to sell it 18 days after he finished.
He did. But all that being said, David O. Russell claims to have not read the script, but was pitched the log of it. And the one sentence description of the script, which was titled at the time Spoils of War, was a heist set in the Gulf War that appealed to him. And he went off and wrote, quote unquote, wrote a script, or did write a script. I don't want to say he didn't. He did. But he said he never read Ridley scripts to not pollute his own idea. John gets credit where it's due. The germ of the idea is what I took from him. There's then an arbitration. The poster has no writing credit to John Ridley on it. But there's an arbitration and it then gets on the prints. So it's actually in the film itself as a story credit. It's all kind of weird. I'm not really sure how to feel about it because David O. Russell's films are such a weird organism to begin with. There's a lot of improvisation. There's a lot of kind of on the fly vibe to it. So it's all very kind of messy and blurry and weird. But I'm happy to see that John Ridley has the credit that I think he probably rightly deserves. But again, add it to the list of, and we will then get into at some point the Clooney David O. Russell conflicts. So it's a lot.
I have feelings about this. Please. I'll tell you all my feelings.
I want all of them. Don't hold back.
One, my lifelong experiment is to write shit as fast as possible. my plan
Sell.
my plan for this year, my plan for this year was to write 6 screenplays. I am currently 6 behind my plan. But I have this
have your 4 children got in the way of the 6 screenplay?
They have, but my real dream. There's this writer. I mean, I hate him, but I have so much fucking respect for the way he does this. You guys know Mattson Tomlin, the guy who's writing the Batman. He wrote blah blah blah, bunch of shit. He writes 10 screenplays a year. And when we did our Clint episode, I talked about the bad pancakes. Yeah. He writes 10 scripts a year. Gives them all to his people. His people say, these are good, these are bad, the way you or I would do with log lines. And they sell the ones that are good and they throw out the ones that are bad, and he's not precious about it. So I love that, because that's the way I would work too if I would just go and write. So him writing this thing in 7 days, I love. Kevin Williamson famously wrote Scream in 3 days. It doesn't matter how fast you do it. Just
this is true. This is true.
Him selling it in 18 days, I'm amazed. I mean, this guy was a fucking stand-up comic, right? This guy was a stand-up comic with no credits. I'm amazed that he was able to get it in front of anybody 18 days later, let alone someone who could purchase it. But, he became John Ridley as an Oscar. I guess he's pretty good at this.
He seems to be competent. He seems to be very good at it.
The third part is, it seems like this script, Spoils of War, went into the Warner Brothers catalog of unproduced scripts. Yeah. Every studio has a whole bunch of shit they buy, and they pretty much are never going to make. Now, I'm not convinced they were never going to make this. I have no idea what's in the original script, but that is where a lot of them live. To have a director who more or less has his little blank check come and say, I want to do the script, is probably a bit of a dream at that point, And he came off Flirting with Disaster, which was a wildly well-reviewed movie. So John Ridley probably felt pretty fucking good about himself. He then experienced what screenwriters have been experiencing since the 70s, since the auteur period, which is basically some director comes and rewrites your entire script. Most just aren't this brazen about it. I don't have a big problem with this. I feel very badly for John Ridley that he wrote a script, but I don't have a big problem with, the author of a movie, which is who the director is, coming and making it his own. And if that means a pay-and-drone rewrite, if that means rewriting 3 characters, or if that means never reading the script, taking the concept and writing from scratch, that is what it is. That's part of the business. I believe. I don't
take issue with it either.
I know. I'm not saying you do. I'm just telling you my feelings. Yeah. And I also believe that that's what happened. I believe that he probably never read it, and I believe that he saw that log line and ran with it. I mean,
I believe that too.
I wasn't done things like that where I hear that there's a script or a television pilot that's somewhat similar to something I'm working on or thinking about, and I will not read it. So I have complete deniability if someone says this is like that. I never read it, never heard of it. Search me. That's my feelings on the whole writing process.
I want to just say something very quickly. First of all, really should give context. An hour into this episode, did not do that. So I'm going to do that right now. That's my bad. Brief synopsis. Just after the end of the Gulf War, 4 American soldiers decide to steal a cache of Saddam Hussein's
Welcome to the podcast, Darren.
Led by cynical Sergeant Major Archie Gates, played by George Clooney. 3 of the men are rescued by rebels, but Sergeant Troy Barlow, played by Mark Wahlberg, is captured and tortured by Iraqi intelligence. The Iraq rebels beg for the American trio to help fight against the impending arrival of Hussein's elite guard. The men agree to fight in return to help rescuing Troy. As we mentioned, the story is by John Ridley. The screenplay by David O. Russell, directed by David O. Russell. It opened on October 1st, 1999, in second place against Double Jeopardy, American Beauty, Blue Streak, and Drive Me Crazy. It would go on to make $107 million on a $48 million budget. It's got 94% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics, 77% from audiences. Roger Ebert's 4-star review said Three Kings is some kind of weird masterpiece, a screw-loose war picture that sends action and humor crashing head-on into each other and spinning off into political anger. It has the freedom and recklessness of Oliver Stone or Robert Altman in their Mad Dog days, and a visual style that hungers for impact. A lot of movies show bodies being hit by bullets. This one sends the camera inside to show a bullet cavity filling up with bile. David O. Russell, who wrote and directed, announces his arrival as a major player. Like the best films of Scorsese, Stone, Altman, and Tarantino, this one sings with a exhilaration of pure filmmaking and embodies ideas in its action and characters. Most movies doze in a haze of calculation and formula. Three Kings is awake and hyper. And then I want to just quickly read a clip from The Ringer. They did a whole series on the 1999 films 2 years ago now, I guess. They said, Three Kings is David O. Russell's most brazen and thrilling work. This has become hackneyed phrasing in contemporary movie writing, but they really don't make him like this anymore. Telling stories this weird, violent, and caustic, right up until they turn simultaneously sentimental and critical of U.S. foreign policy. The conclusion is a magic trick. It laid the groundwork for the next century's socio-political struggles. The events of September 11th would arrive less than 2 years later and argue a misbegotten return to Iraq. The privatized military operations executed by companies like Dick Cheney's led Halliburton would follow and reflect a generation of soldiers eager to get properly paid for their experience in conflict. The refugee crisis resonates clearly today from Europe through Latin America and the Middle East. This movie saw the future, even if it doesn't always seem present. It's too angry, too confusing, too violent. It's a lot like war. So that's that. I do want to say very quickly, as a lead into what I imagine will be a brief conversation about this Clooney O'Russell bullshit. O'Russell, as he mentioned, never wanted Clooney in the role. He wanted...
Not O'Russell.
What did I say?
O'Russell.
O'Russell. Did I not say that? David O'Russell?
Yeah, but he's not Irish.
Anyway.
That's his middle initial. That's like S. Truman.
So his first choices were Clint Eastwood, Mel Gibson, Nicolas Cage, Jack Nicholson, and Dustin Hoffman. They all turned down the role. He also offered it apparently to Nick Nolte. And then Jeff Bridges apparently wanted to play the role, but the studio wouldn't let him after The Big Lebowski tanked the year prior, which is hilarious now. And Matt Damon and Matthew McConaughey both turned down the role of Troy Barlow. The Clooney David O. Russell situation, I think, really can be distilled very easily into David O. Russell is clearly a maniac on set. He clearly is just, abusive. He yells at people. He is searching for some sort of chemistry that a lot of filmmakers feel the only way they can get is through harassment. And Clooney didn't fucking want to take it anymore. And there was a stunt with an extra that David O. Russell physically did himself. And some people say it was just him showing the guy how to do the stunt. Some people say it wasn't. Clooney didn't see it that way. They got into a tussle. Subsequently, they seem to be fine now. That's the long and short of it. But it's worth just saying that this happened on set. And it's weirdly, and I don't know if you guys feel this way, kind of the legacy of this fucking movie.
Yeah, I think that's true. And again, I think it's too bad. I mean,
I agree.
I think this movie should be more discussed than it is. I think it's a lot better than some of the 1999 films that tend to kind of get the nostalgia promotion. I think there's something so genuinely urgent about this movie at its best. I do think that, the tabloidy nature of that, it kind of got absorbed a little bit into the larger O. Russell story after the I Heart Huckabees footage leaked. And I think that's too bad. I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack with the kind of, young hotshot indie tour directors of the 90s and the questions of, were they using their now kind of bygone superpowers as directors in ways that were always good. But I do think that, with this movie, more so than with his kind of, post-fighter period, whatever was going wrong with his interpersonal dynamics on set was producing some pretty bold and vibrant artistic visions. I don't want to say that justifies a very much discussed controversial situation with the stunt guy. I mean, that is something that I think even the participants involved have kind of changed their stories about over the years.
Correct.
But this is a time when, a guy who had just come off of a couple indie movies was going to the desert to make a movie about the Iraq War. And I think that, it's sad that the only legacy of it is him being an asshole, because a lot of directors are assholes.
I think it should also be said too, in the reading that I've done, Clooney really went to the mat for this guy. Like he really used every bit of clout he had at the time, which is, if we're being honest, was still in kind of a nascent stage, right? Like he was a movie star, but not fully there yet. And he's using whatever clout he has to give David O. Russell the ability and the rope to make the movie that he wants to make. Even under these circumstances, even with him feeling as though it was a somewhat abusive film set. So I don't say that to pat Clooney on the back too much, but I think it should be said that, Clooney, who would obviously become a future filmmaker of his own, understood the situation and wanted to make the best film that they could. Well, Kenny just made quotation marks for
that's
filmmaker.
Kind of the other, to me, that's the other what if is like, think of Clooney at this time, just looking for like an independent filmmaker who could use his clout. Like he winds up in a symbiotic relationship with Soderbergh for a few years after this. But that's kind of, I think that with what you're describing, Phil, his relationship as a star to this movie, to David O. Russell's vision, I think there's a lot of his support that comes across in the movie that is finally made, whatever their interpersonal dynamics were at the time.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's a real, I don't know, that's an interesting situation, and I wish that was the conversation more than they got into a tussle on set. So
I think Clooney's cultural imprint is a particularly interesting one.
I agree.
Because first of all, I do want to say, I don't think I've ever seen a George Clooney movie where I didn't love his presence. I love what he brings to the screen. He is as movie star as movie stars get to me. I think that George Clooney was a movie star before he was a movie star, which is to say, ER, obviously a brilliant show. But ER was a brilliant show that starred a movie star, right?
Correct.
Like this guy, who most people didn't know at the time, had the presence of a Hollywood icon. Yeah. So I think that there's something interesting about Clooney. In 99, he had ER for what, 4 or 5 years? Something
five
like
seasons,
that?
Yeah, 5 seasons.
5 seasons. And he had the failure of Batman, and he had done some other things one fine day. But he certainly didn't have the clout you would think he was able to wield, and I would say that's because of who he is. I don't think we can sleep on the fact that sometimes in interpersonal relationships, the relative power goes beyond what you could actually do. I think Clooney's entire career, he has been able to outkick his abilities. In terms of what he's been able to get done. Like, I think the movies that he's been able to make as a director outstrip his abilities as a director. Almost always, right? But he continually is able to work with these, weighty subjects, with this really strong IP, with this really enormous budgets. He just did it with A Midnight Sky, a movie no one cared about, and a movie that most people would not give to a movie star that has, The Men Who Stares at Goats on the record. or Suburbicon, or these ridiculous movies that he's
Leatherheads. Don't forget Leatherheads, Kenny.
Leatherheads is like his good movie. I think now that George Clooney's a quote unquote bad filmmaker, I'm even looking back, I'm like, I don't even think Confessions of a Dangerous Mind was that good. Like he
only has one great movie, and that's Good Night, which is a legitimately great film. But I also think that it's kind of, I think the reason it's a great film is because he's boxed in.
Very
right.
I agree.
Like he basically has to
it's
tell.
Not the Midnight Sky.
It's not the Midnight Sky. It's interesting. Obviously we've talked about how David O. Russell didn't want Clooney at the time, and to some degree it's understandable. Just in terms of the TV stardom of it all, they sent a rough cut of Out of Sight to him.
Out of Sight was 98. Sorry, yes, my bad.
So he does have Out of Sight, and that I think is the fulcrum point for a lot of people. People point to Out of Sight, Three Kings, Oh Brother Where Art Thou as the kind of the three films that change people's perception of Clooney. But it is kind of funny that Clooney has to work so hard to get this role. He's very good in this role, but I would also say too, it's a kind of encumbered Clooney performance. It doesn't feel free. He doesn't, and I mean, I don't want to project what was transpiring on set to the performance because I don't know that they necessarily speak to each other, but it's not like the most charismatic Clooney performance, right? Like, I don't feel like it's, and I don't say that as a dig. I just think it feels a little bit like he's trying out some stuff.
I want to say one more thing about Clooney.
Yeah, please.
Anytime, with the exception of Syriana, anytime George Clooney plays a person who doesn't have every single door open for him because he's so fucking handsome and charming, I don't believe it. So that's why I think like he's the only Danny Ocean in the world, right?
Right.
And he's the only, what's the guy's name out of sight? I don't remember, but he's the only person.
Jack Foley.
He's the only person who could pull Jack Foley off too. But when and Sirianni, he's playing against that, but it doesn't make any sense in a movie like The fucking Descendants that like every door is slammed on his face. You are George Clooney.
I love that you found a way to shit on Alexander Payne.
You know, it's not the movie I find of his most objectionable.
I know.
But I think it's
Which
his
one's
worst
that?
movie. What's that?
Which one's the most objectionable?
The most objectionable movie he made is the one with Damon a couple years ago.
Downsizing?
Downsizing.
No, Downsizing is pretty interesting. It has some bad moments, but
Objectionable.
Downsizing is pretty interesting.
Here's what I'll say.
That I think he has a few very bad movies. I think
that's fair. That's
fair. It's a very bad movie. I think About Schmidt's a very bad movie, and I think Descendants is his worst.
I think that some people I don't disagree. When Kenny and I were
Kenny and I did
Election.
Downsizing was a tantalizing premise. I ran to see that movie, but I thought it was objectionable. All right,
let me just throw out. Let me just throw out. I mean, Downsizing, which is very controversial for a lot of reasons that would not be worth getting into.
Correct.
I think that movie is going to age almost better than any movie the last 10 years because it is a movie that is about one thing for like 90 minutes, like first two acts, and then it suddenly is entirely about like global warming and climate change in a way that like totally dominates the movie. I think that is one thing I would just say about Downsizing, a movie I definitely came in really excited to talk about, is I think it's worth another look. I think it's
Darren, if I'm still podcasting in 10 years, I promise you that won't be the case. If global warming has to take us down, I will not allow that.
You and me will have shrunk down. We'll be hanging with the Norwegians over in like the weird biodome.
Yeah. But if my wife didn't come with me, ooh.
I want to just let's get into the plot. We'll hop around. We've hit a bunch of things already, but I just kind of want to hit some of the bigger plot points. Obviously, the plot of this film actually is pretty simple. These guys, go to steal some gold that they find on a map that Iraqi has jammed up his ass, and which again, like, a testament to this movie that they can pull off something as pretty broadly comedic as a map being pulled out of a prisoner's ass, and somehow make the whole thing work. But they find this map, and Clooney's character.
That's a great little character moment for the two of them, though. He gave him the glove because he's Wahlberg.
He only gave you one glove.
He only had one glove. He only had one glove. I know if he had two gloves, he would have given him the other glove.
Yeah, for sure. He's like, I only got one glove.
Chain of command.
But so Clooney's character, Archie Gates, is sort of this. He seems to, I don't know. He doesn't know what they're doing anymore. He's lost sort of faith in the industrial military complex and is like, I don't really want to do this anymore. Or seems as though he doesn't really get it. He hears about this map. This reporter played by Nora Dunn, Adriana, also hear about the map. Long story short, Clooney hears about the map, gets into the room with them, and him, Ice Cube, Troy, and Spike, and Clooney decide that they're going to go try to get this gold. I like the scene with Clooney, and I never know how to. Is it? How do you say Michael T. Williamson? Michael T. Williamson. My apologies. I love the scene they have together. Again, I'm a big fan of scenes that can get expo across, but the actors are just fucking great and it just works. And it's just a great scene of two guys that just tell us the lay of the land. You get a nice strobe effect with this chopper taking off.
Yeah. That's very Altman to me. That's that kind of like
Yes.
we're getting across the entire larger theme of the movie. Clooney as a guy who's kind of over it all, like just shut up and do what I tell you to do, and we'll come off okay after this. And then that kind of strobe effect. I think that's the good thing is like the movie does not spend too long trying to build up his character and why he's resentful. You kind of get it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Just to bring it all kind of
Full circle.
Very Yossarian. That's a very Yossarian vibe. A character Clooney didn't play Yossarian, right? In his Catch-22, which I'm sure he butchered, but Altman also butchered it. So yes, it's a very similar vibe of like, what the fuck are we doing here?
Yeah.
No.
Well, it's a lot of that, like the absurdity of war, the absurdity of all of this. Like, why are we doing this? Which you feel. I mean, that.
Oh, sorry. It was Nichols, not.
Yeah, it was Mike Nichols,
not Altman.
But that permeates the whole film, and I think it's why you guys bump, and to some degree I bump on the ending as well, because it feels counterintuitive. It feels like it's. We'll get to the ending when we get there, but basically, you got a great Jamie Kennedy bit with the night vision goggles. It was like, I never got to use them at night. He's like, they don't work during the day. He's like, they kind of work.
Again, that had to be an ad lib. That's so good. Like that's a comedian being funny. So, yeah.
Then they basically decide that they're going to go and do this. You got a great sort of moment where you've got the needle drop of. Oh, sorry, that comes later. You've got them driving. They're skeet shooting with Nerf footballs.
Yeah.
Because Clooney told them that they could shoot some rounds when they were far enough out because they didn't see any action. Spike attaches some.
That's basically a save the cat moment right there. Let these guys shoot in the desert. What a guy.
So and fucking Spike attaches some C4 to a thing. Clooney basically is like, what the fuck are you doing? There are two scenes in this film that there's a lot
setting
of scenes,
up the climax, obviously.
But there's two setting up the climax, but it's two scenes that stay with me. The scene where Clooney explains the sepsis that you can get from a gunshot wound, where like the bullet doesn't kill you necessarily, but the infection kills you. And that shot of the camera going inside Troy and seeing the bile stayed with me. And what that does, as I'm sure you guys know, is when you do get any gunfire in this movie, every bullet has a weight to it. And I think that is masterful. Mm-hmm. When they have their firefight later, there are very few bullets that are actually shot. So everyone feels like it could be a kill shot. And it's incredible.
He does something awesome, which is, in general, because we're so obsessed with weapons and violence, you only hear when the cartridge gets emptied, boom, boom, boom. But he goes boom, boom, boom. Then you hear all the entrance wounds, and that really hammers home this idea of action and consequence.
Yeah, it's one of those things that David O. Russell said in a lot of interviews, which is that a lot of the action set pieces, a lot of the explosions, a lot of that stuff was shot with one camera, one take. He didn't want a bunch of coverage. He didn't want to shoot it like a music video. He didn't want it to be sort of like, look at how fucking cool this is. And that grittiness seeps into every part of the film in a lot of ways. That, which comes back to sort of that tone I'm talking about, of that like, that mixed with humor gives you a chemical equation that makes this film so its own.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for every point of action in an action heavy movie to have a true moral dimension, and even harder to do that when, as we're getting into the first big gunfight scene, it comes after some funny moments, some over the top moments, some, milk truck exploding moments, to kind of go through all that and then really zero in on even, people attacking the protagonists whose death kind of seems really tragic. Yeah, I think that the weight that you're describing, right down to the way that the effects kind of come across, and the violence, that's all totally astonishing.
Yeah, and mix it to that, you got a cow that explodes, and then a fucking Beach Boys needle drop of them, hauling ass into this towards this bunker.
Round, get around, I get around.
Which what I love about that is that Wahlberg starts it. He's like singing it while he's taking cow guts off of himself, and then it just leads right into it.
I love that too.
It's great.
It felt very real to me.
So then they go to this bunker. The Iraqis lie to them and tell them that the gold isn't there. They go out of town. They take a second. Clooney realizes that they've been lied to. It's at this point that Wahlberg's like, why are we going back? We're going to get shot. And Clooney gives a great speech about necessity. And then that plays into later the scene with Troy and Saeed in terms of talking about what is necessity, which I really love. Yeah, I mean, you've got the we talked about the firefight. You essentially now the film really comes into play because there's the Iraqi prisoners that they release from the bunker, and now you have this the moral quandary that these guys are in essentially for the rest of the film, which is they get firsthand account of what's happening to these people, which is that Bush said, "Rise up, we'll be there for you." We're not there for you. And these people are being massacred now by the various other people inside Iraq. And you get the impression that Clooney knew this information obviously beforehand, but it wasn't until he actually saw the people's lives being affected by it that it really is hammered home. There's a cultural component to it as well. I mean, seeing how the shrines seep into Spike's character, into Conrad's character, and how he sees the afterlife and just spirituality in some way or another. All of these things start to really kind of, I don't know, find their way inside the characters, which I really love. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about the minefield gas attack sequence, because I think that might be one of the most virtuosic kind of moments from a filmmaking perspective in the film. There are shots that feel very like, I hate to say indie, but like camera angles and shots that would just not be done in a studio movie. I think about like some of these like wacky, like off kilter shots of the mines, that shot of the van that honestly skims over a camera that makes me think they destroyed a camera to get it. Like, what did you guys think of that sequence?
It's kind of awesome, too, because I think one of the hardest things to do with any action scene in a movie, whatever level of reality the action is kind of meant to be set in, it's really hard to like show people just kind of accidentally doing things, even though that's exactly how people would react to, gas and gunfight and gunfire. And so the fact that like one of the most crucial actions that happens in that scene is Spike Jonze's character not being able to find his mask and just ruining everything. I think that's handled so well. You're kind of prepared at that point for the idea of, okay, these are like military guys. They got to be able, they must know what to do in this situation. And of course, I think part of the virtuosity you're describing is you realize like, no, like, I mean, or even if they do, it's easy for one tiny screw up to just kind of snowball. And that's how you wind up with just everybody scattered in the desert, amidst the gas. I think that's really interesting.
I want to posit a theory here that I think might be bullshit, but I'm going to say it anyway. One of the things that hit me as I was watching this film is that most of the truly insane action shots involve Spike Jonze. And I'm wondering whether or not he cast the guy because he knew he would be crazy enough to let him actually put him into these situations.
He's a skateboarder, He's a skateboarder. He's like, whatever, man. I'll do it.
I think he's unbreakable. He's just one of those guys. He's just those guys, and they're always 100%. They're always that size too.
Yeah.
I think that there's a really important distinction that sometimes doesn't get made when talking about film between realistic action movies and unrealistic action movies, and they both have their place. And having watched dozens and dozens of unrealistic action movies over the past, few months for this Bruckheimer draft. I think the biggest difference, and I did some shit that, I might be completely flying off the handle. Mm-hmm. Bruckheimer and, the Simon West and the Lethal Weapons and even the Die Hards, they exist specifically as escapist fare. Mm-hmm. And the question to me, what I was thinking of when I was watching this movie is, okay, what are we escaping from? Right? Like, what is it about modern life that we need to escape from, particularly during a pandemic, right? Like it's not really like I'm not escaping so much from my taxes or from my responsibilities as a parent because I go to a movie for 2 hours to watch good guys kill bad guys. What I'm really escaping from, and this is where I might lose like tons of people, what I'm really escaping from is the power dynamic in society of oppressor and oppressed. Okay. Where for 2 hours, you don't have to think about the role you play in society as part of the oppressor team, right? As part of the team that benefit. I'm talking about it as a white person, particularly a white male. Part of the person that benefits from police presence. Part of the group that benefits from military presence. Part of the person that benefits from a underserved underclass, and all of these things that are morally difficult to deal with, I think. And the Michael Bay's movies like that really allow you to divorce yourself from that and escape from that for a couple of hours. Whereas a movie like this that depicts realistic action forces you to confront that. And that's why I think a movie like this, and a scene like what we're talking about, where it's all realistic, where like there are things that are kind of funny in the context of what happens, but none of it feels like Superman beating the shit out of like, you know, super villains or bad villains. It doesn't feel like right's going to triumph just because they're, you know, quote unquote right because the movie tells us they're right. I think that's incredibly important.
I totally agree with that.
I think these are incredibly important movies. And that's part of why people don't want to talk about it that much. That's part of why it never really even took on that Fight Club thing where people willfully misrepresent it.
Yeah.
It just is a movie that, like, if you really start to think about what's going on, it's not awesome. It's not cool. It's not fun. It's not escapist. It's just hard to handle what we do in this world, I think. And I think it's great in that
I agree
way.
with that.
And even like, you know, you're making me realize that one of the most interesting aspects of the movie is, you know, here's a movie about the American military in a war that, as the movie kind of addresses, America felt like we have the moral imperative here. We know who's good. We know who's bad. If we cast actors to play Americans in this movie, you know, there's a sense of, you know, the moral binary is here in a way that it might not be otherwise. And it's interesting that the movie's kind of about these guys going to a place where, as the necessity speech makes clear, they're kind of invisible in a way, or or rather they have this kind of Teflon around them because the American military might as well not exist anymore. There's a treaty that's been signed. So the fact that, like, you know, the movie is kind of about them getting back into the middle of it, putting themselves in danger when they don't have to put themselves in danger. I mean, even, you know, the idea that at the end of the movie, as I've said, I struggle with it a little bit, but that it's kind of just about literally being like, hey, like, you know, Michael T. Williamson and the American military, like, can you briefly establish that you are here to help these people, and then kind of, you know, go back to your bubble. I do think that's interesting and kind of speaks to what you're talking about, where it really forces you to grapple with, you know, this is not a situation where the military is here to do something and everyone agrees with that. That it's kind of that liminal moment where it may as well not exist at all, at least given the larger geopolitical realities that are kind of around them.
And then you could start to get into the questions, which I think, you know, are valid questions of what America's role in the world is. Because as someone with the power, we have the money, we have the power, we have the, you know, military might, et cetera, we have a role. I can't help but think of the ways in which American capitalism is really what we export. It's not American democracy that we export. We export it through military might and fear. And I'm not necessarily even saying that is bad. I'm saying this is a fact, right? I'm just saying this is a fact. I think it's an open question as to whether it's good or bad when, like, you are getting rid of evil tyrants who kill their own people, like Saddam Hussein.
Well,
It's hard.
In fairness, everything is in this movie that you're saying, even, on the capitalist front, the fact that like when they find where the gold is being kept, it's in this bunker full of like watches and like cool audio equipment and on television. And on television, I believe
Rodney
they're
King.
watching video of the Rodney King. So like all this stuff is all kind of weaved in together. To me, that apexes with when the Saeed Tagmaoui character is talking about Michael Jackson as this larger symbol, and that's kind of when the movie becomes the like exploding football movie. I think it's like we're on this awesome just rise of what the movie is kind of grappling with, and then there is that kind of dwindling away of what it's trying to do.
Well, I agree with you. I think that it's, at this point, Troy is taken hostage. They and the Iraqi soldiers are just like, but there's a ceasefire. We're not supposed to be taking soldiers anymore. So it does exist in this weird sort of nether region of like what is right and wrong under this ceasefire agreement. But they do take him hostage. There's a great scene that I think really sums up the humor, the heart, the stakes of what this movie is trying to navigate. Troy calls his wife and she picks up the phone and she's super excited to hear from him. And she's like, I thought the war was over, honey. And he says, well, it is and it isn't, babe, which I think is perfect. Like a perfect summation of what's going on. I mean, still, but I think that and this leads into the scene that you're talking about. It's several scenes, but I want to kind of break it down a little bit. You've got the Michael Jackson component where Saeed is saying, you've made this black man hate himself so much that he's changed his appearance. And Mark Wahlberg is saying that it's complicated and it's not really like that. And I think, there's also should be said too that Warner Brothers made them take out a line where it was alluded to as pedophilia.
And I assume that was Wahlberg's line. I do too. I assume that was him coming back and being like, you should know a little more about the guy you're, standing for right now. But but it also should be said that apparently Mark Wahlberg attached actual electrodes to his body, so he was electrocuted in this scene. That's my man.
That's your boy.
There's also the scene where he, would corral the exploding footballs just to have it feel it.
But this leads to a scene where Syed tells Troy about the bombings that injured his wife and killed his son. And you have these cutaways to what transpired to the son, and also cutaways to Troy imagining what could happen to his own family. It's really powerful stuff, and it does a great job of showing these two guys. And then later you see them talking about how they both joined the army to support their families, and that this is all a business to some degree or another, and that they took these jobs because they're jobs and they can help pay their bills and help them. So it's like they don't even have, I mean, I guess Troy has an allegiance to America. I don't mean to suggest that he doesn't, but like it's hard to glean from Saeed whether or not he really is all that. I mean, he doesn't seem to really want to support Saddam. He just wants to be able to have a family and support them.
It's incredible. His performance is like incredible. I mean, it's almost kind of like there was a while where after this where he wasn't really in a lot of major things. Then he was in Lost, then Wonder Woman. Yes, I feel like now he's in a lot more stuff. He had that crazy scene in John Wick 3, I think. But it's his performance really brings the movie to a whole other level. I mean, I think, again, that's the stuff where I'm just kind of like, it's so awesome. And I feel like there should be more of a climax there. And it just doesn't quite hit. And
it doesn't stick the landing 100%.
That's my struggle with the movie is like the middle's so great. It's the classic thing of when a movie is doing all this great stuff for a while and then it kind of loses the thread a little bit. Do you still credit it for what it was doing, or is there some lack ultimately when it can't kind of follow through on?
Well, like Lost.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what's great about...
I know that you're not allowed to criticize the Lost ending now, apparently, but come on, guys.
Who's not allowed to criticize it?
It's like this thing now. It's like this thing now that like I feel like people have really pushed like you can't criticize the Lost ending. It was, I don't even know what the argument is. Like it was good or something, but
I think even Damon Lindelof has said aspects of, I mean, there's issues with the Lost ending. We don't need to cycle down that particular rabbit hole.
It reminds me of that a little bit, because I'll tell you, not in any way other than I think they took like the lamest, most boring, most kumbaya way out, kind of like I think this did. But not to foreshadow my ranking at the end, the more I think about Lost, the less I think about the ending, and more I think about how much I loved for the first 6 seasons and 11 episodes or whatever, 15 episodes, which I did. I'm crazy about that show, and I've ignored the ending for the most part. The more we talk about this film, the more I forget the thing that was the final image that I was left with, which was you really copped out. And the more I think of, well, you copped out because you took it so far, because you did so many good things in the beginning that I was expecting you to hit a home run. And I guess I can handle a double off the wall. So
I think that I agree with, I 100% agree with what you're saying. And something did occur to me that we'll talk about when we get to the ending in a minute, but I'll just say that one of the things about the Saeed performance and the character that's so brilliant too is, how dangerous he seems, and yet at the same time so caring. And I mean, there's their moment, their scene or their arc together ends with Troy trying to convince him that they came into this war for stability in the region and to try to find, to stop people from being killed and to save the Iraqi people. Saeed does not agree and jams a compact disc case in his mouth and pours oil down his throat and says, "This is your fucking stability, my main man." I love that he says "my main man" so much.
It goes, dude, it's great.
Yeah, it's the best. But it's a really powerful, haunting image that stayed with me.
Yeah, I mean, all the more so because, again, this is the prophetic side of the movie, doing that to Mark Wahlberg, who would become, a defining American action star.
Correct.
Starring in very jingoistic Michael Bay movies.
Wait, you think Pete Berg is jingoistic?
I just think that that's also, I forgot about the other guy too.
Poor Pete Berg.
I just that's
there was a time he was nuanced.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes.
We're past that now.
Very bad things is comparatively nuanced, but I don't know. I just the Lost comparison is now really sticking with me. You guys are writers, so you would know this more than me. Writers of stories as opposed to rants about movies, but like it seems like such a tricky thing to not on some level ultimately make a story circle back around to quote unquote the character's journey. And with Three Kings, I guess all I feel is the ending in my head would have needed to have been a complete shift. Like it would have been completely like we're following Cliff Curtis for another 5 minutes at the end or something like that. Like that's the only way all these threads we're talking about, I think, would have really gotten paid off. And so in that sense, I know we keep jumping around a little bit. This makes me forgive the ending a little bit, but it also makes me feel like, in the middle, it's about much more than these guys. And then there is that sort of, okay, we're now kind of resetting back to these three guys and, their happy endings, which that's the letdown, but I'm not sure if there's any way except for being totally unconventional that you get around that.
For sure. And I do think that the ending suffers a little bit from trying to get out as quick as possible as well. So it tries to do a lot of shit in a very short amount of time and doesn't allow a lot of things to land. It also sort of infuses artificial tension into it a little bit. The Troy valve thing, Troy gets shot and his lung gets punctured. So when they put the quote unquote cuffs on him, he can't get the valve to open up. So it's like there's just good. It's good, but it's all kind of like jammed into an ending that I think we all agree needs a little bit of breathing room to stick a lot of tricky landings. But before we get there, real quick, Conrad playing Chicago's "Oh No Baby Please Don't Go" as he drives into the bunker is great. There are great fucking needle drops in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, sir.
I'm trying to think of the ending that might have worked for me, and I'm in all these crazy places right now. I'm thinking would it have worked if someone had gone, with them, like having Costner and that. No, I don't think that would have worked. But I think that would have played poorly.
Yeah.
I think that the most interesting thing that I would have played through to the end, is when I think it was Michael T. Williams who said this is a media war early on.
Yeah, it's in the scene with Lauded. Yeah.
And that's why Nora Dunn is even there, allowed on the scene. And it was a media war.
Totally.
Right? It was a media war play on America and Europe about the Middle East, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I would have gone in the opposite direction in the end, which is that the people who were letting them go were bureaucrats from America who brought their own crew to show how empathetic and compassionate America was, that they were breaking protocol for these, downtrodden Iraqis to send them to a place. I mean, I don't really remember exactly what Iran was at that time, but that after all of our guys' hard work and all of their change, they don't get to be heroes. Nora Dunn doesn't get to be a hero. Even Michael T. Williams doesn't get to be a hero. It's George Bush who sent in, I don't know if it was Donald, I think it was Donald Rumsfeld.
It might have been Rumsfeld.
Who sent in Rumsfeld with his own camera crew to be like, this is how great we are. Look at what we've done.
That's interesting.
And that does feel like that was the war I remember, where we were talked about, where we were sold this idea of we're liberating a people who were unjustly invaded by an evil tyrant. That's our mission. It has nothing to do with oil, though it did. It has nothing to do with gold, though it kind of did. It had nothing to do with geopolitical, three-dimensional chess, the giant game of Risk, though it did. It really was just about liberating these people. And that's what I think I would have done. I would have kept the PR angle up in a major way and not in a way that our people benefited.
I like what you're saying, because my only fix was like it should end sadly and they don't make it over the border. But I'm realizing what you're describing is brilliant, because within the constructs of a nominally happy ending, it's that kind of treasure of the Sierra Madre thing where like the protagonists do not ultimately feel that they are victorious. The good thing happens in the worst possible way. I think that's even that kind of energy. I just think it's a little better than, as Phil was describing, when you're just rapidly getting through media fixed this and now they're doing okay at Hollywood.
Well, I really think that there's a couple things that, as we've been talking about this, I've been thinking about the ending. First of all, I think it needed some breathing room. Kenny, I love your idea, and I think it's absolutely the right ending, because it allows you, it does give you the ability to say the things you want to say and also not, have a downer of an ending. I honestly think the fucking epilogue is really the problem for me now. Like, because if you have them turn away, as they did, the three of them turn away, you've got a freeze frame, and you give me a fucking, a little bit of an epilogue in terms of text saying that, because of the media, they didn't have any charges and they didn't go to jail. That's enough of a win for me.
And the thing about the Kuwaitis getting most of the gold, I think I get it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I'm fine with all of that in text. What I don't need is this odd little button of comedic what have you, of like Clooney and Ice Cube really working on a set. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a fucking cameo from David O. Russell in that epilogue. He's the one being choked by the guy in the
is he?
In the movie. So like on top of all of that, there's that. Because what I think it does, for me anyway, is it kind of undercuts the whole fucking thing. Like I love the tone that this movie struck comedically throughout. I didn't need the movie to end with that comedic button.
It's so tough, because it's that moment, that final kind of cut sequence. There is just a kind of brattiness to the 90s that this movie, I mean, which I loved at the time because I was a brat, but this movie does not really have that. And so to suddenly have it right at the end, I think you're right. That maybe even more so than the actual, third act finale.
I totally
kind of
agree with you guys.
Theater, the assholes that paid for this movie, because I'm sure that they, were just like, I don't really get it. At least they leave with a happy, kind of like funny, quirky note. And that's a bummer, because I think the movie deserves better.
Couldn't agree more.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And again, it's the tough problem of when a movie has been doing so many interesting things so much, and just the very end is the least interesting part. You know, there is just that. It's the difficulty of to what extent do we credit it for everything else it was doing, and to what extent is this just, you know, the final button is the bit that you're kind of left with. That, yeah, I mean, and again, at the time, I loved the ending because it was, you know, it's that kind of quick shot, rapid, kind of snarky Chiron thing that was so in right then, and that's the part that's kind of aged the worst. That's the most Guy Ritchie-ish part of the movie, and unfortunately,
the Chirons throughout the whole film didn't really work for me. They really only used up top to introduce everybody, but it's done, to your point, in such a like snarky 90s way.
I actually liked the first ones quite a bit because I thought Spike's wants to be Troy was funny, and I also thought like maybe it's heavy-handed, but Ice Cube's on a 4-week paid vacation from Detroit says quite a bit.
Yes. I want to highlight one other thing because it's one of my favorite moments in the film. It's one of the funniest moments in the film, and it feels like, unfortunately, it's mirrored a little bit at the end, which is at the near the beginning when they're all talking in the tent around the map. And Clooney says, if we do this right, we could quit our day jobs unless you want to keep doing your day jobs. And the cutaways to Mark Wahlberg tearing open a fucking printer ink cartridge and it's spilling all over him, to Ice Cube throwing fucking luggage on a conveyor belt, and then Spike just with a sawed-off shotgun just shooting stuffed animals on a fucking card saying, I didn't really have a day job. It's
that cutaway to him like shooting the truck, like that is the golden age of comedy cutaways right there.
Yeah.
Like everything after that could only be kind of a letdown. But
I agree. That's as good as it gets.
I'm with you. Like that stuff, that style there, it's done really, really well for sure.
Here it's done in such a like winky, shitty way, whereas those cutaways they're gut punches because we've all had those jobs, right? Like whatever it is, a job you're just like, fuck. Like, and in my head, I remember sitting in the theater in 99 and being like, I mean, I've had some shitty jobs, but I guess there are people that are just like, well, I guess being in the military is just another shitty job, right? Like it's that works.
I think that's 95% of people in the military.
I'm sure.
I think that, and I think that should constantly be remembered and reiterated in the halls of Congress. The people who you're sending to war, it really is.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, I know that there are people who are not there for that reason. My wife's first cousin is like in the military, and he went to Michigan. And he's going to Harvard Law. Like he absolutely is there because he believes in the cause on a higher level. But for the most part, it's people who, you know, it's their best option. And that's very upsetting.
You guys are making me realize that there is a real strong like sibling relationship with this movie, with those moments and the idea of it as a job, to something like Office Space or the sort of like, you know, Dilberty parts of Fight Club. Like I hadn't really thought of that before, but it is that same sense of like, we need to break out of, especially for these three guys, their totally awful jobs that they have back home in, you know, any way possible. I don't know. It's something in the air.
That's a very, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, Kenny, but you know, the sort of like desire not to conform is definitely a thing that you can feel throughout 99. You can feel sort of this like millennial kind of, and by that I mean the changing of the millennium, this idea of feeling like you need to break out of something. Does that make, do you know what I'm saying, Kenny?
But it's not, I agree with you completely, but it's not nothing. The thing about the late 80s, early 90s Gen X slacker period was we are going to not conform and we're going to replace it with doing nothing. Right? That's our big thing is like, this is all absurd. Yeah. And instead, what we're going to do is nothing.
I want to stay home and get high and watch Beavis and Butthead. That's what I'm
which I you know, fine, teach their own.
Yeah, sure.
What happened around the turn of the millennium, and I think Darren, it's a really good point. You know, there is kind of a kindred spirits thing between this Office Space and Fight Club. Was we're going to replace it with something, right? And it usually is. You know, I've been saying this in relation to a project that I'm working on right now, but I think this movie really speaks to this as well. That the American dream is not to get rich. The American dream is to get rich quick, right? And that's what these three movies kind of have in common. Now, I get Fight Club is a little different, but Fight Club isn't so much about materialism, but it is about changing it all right now on a large scale.
Being trapped. This idea of yes.
But like not just like instead like the Gen X thing was like Unabomber almost. Like it was like, I'm out of here. You plebes can fend for yourself. Whereas the Fight Club thing is like, oh no. You don't see what's going on here, but I'm going to tear it all down. Matrix too.
Now, where on this line, though, do we graph "Join Me in the Club of Immortal Cannibals" from Ravenous? Where does Robert Carlyle fall on that?
It's a very good question.
I thought you were talking about Armie Hammer.
Yeah, I did too.
Hey, I did it. Join Me in the Club of Immortal Cannibals.
Yeah.
We did that already. That was one of our first movies.
That was one of our early ones. I will say though, I kind of, this feels like a good way to kind of wrap the episode in the sense of, we talked up top, and by Kenny I mean like back on Eyes Wide Shut on our first episode. We talked a lot about the auteurs of this year, right? The David O. Russells, the David Finchers, the Paul Thomas Andersons, the Mike Judges. These guys who somehow snuck in studio doors, and the studios allowed them to make these pretty gigantic, expensive movies.
How wonderful is that?
It's an amazing thing. And this film feels so emblematic of that, of this, like, we got it, guys. Like we've snuck in the door and they're letting us do shit. And I mean, we all know where Hollywood has gone since then, but it's fascinating how thematically they all kind of connect in some way or another in terms of sort of anti-establishmentarianism and trying to sort of, shake up the system. But then this film kind of trips over itself in landing that punch, which is a bummer.
You know, it's interesting. I just want to say one thing about that I think is kind of interesting. The fun of those movies is exactly what you're saying, is that they're all doing it under the noses of the biggest conglomerates of the world. Like there is this, like, there's this rapscallion quality to it. I'm thinking, who does that now? Because it's not that, there's someone who does it. Yeah. It's Megan Ellison, right?
Yes. Or A24.
Yeah, for lower budgets. Yeah. But like the problem with A24 and Megan Ellison, I guess it's not a problem, but it upsets me a little bit. It's like they're totally game. They're totally on board with it. So there is no sticking anything in the eye. It's just it must be weirdly liberating for all of these Annapurna directors to just, for the most part, be able to do what they want to do. Yeah. And I guess that makes better movies sometimes, but on the other hand, like, I do think they kept the kind of that rogue rebellious streak that you get out of these 99 movies where you have to hide the ball a little more. Like The Matrix and being John Malkovich, like, we know what The Matrix is about now. We're about to, talk about John Malkovich at some point. Like, that's wild and exciting. Today, it's just all out there on Front Street.
Yeah. I kind of wonder if it's partially the energy of, if as a filmmaker, you need to be justifying what you're doing, like every day of a project, to the powers that be, versus, today, if by some miracle you do get a Megan Ellison budget, she's kind of like, go away. I assume that's probably healthier psychologically, but I wonder if that explains why with a lot of the 99 movies, there's just that, like, we are putting it all on screen, and every day I am reproving the need to do the Kinetachrome negative double budget film. Like, I don't know, that seems pretty specific to that time and place, that kind of energy, whether it's comedic, dramatic, action, fantasy, or in Three Kings, which to me, the one thing that stands out about it is, like, it was about recent history. Like, there is that sort of slightly journalistic edge to it, quote marks around journalistic.
Sure.
I'm going to try to make this point as objectively as possible, though it's going to sound very subjective. There is no need for subtext when everybody's fine with you just putting it all out as text. And that makes for less interesting art to me. Yeah. So you have things today that are really exciting and provocative, and it's very cool that they exist. Like, for instance, I really enjoyed I May Destroy You, but I May Destroy You is all out there. I know exactly what's going on with I May Destroy You. Whereas we've had movies about people who are oppressed and people who are abused and people who are marginalized in some way that had to be told opaquely, that are kind of more fun to unwrap when you had to unwrap them, when they had to be slipped past the gatekeepers. So I do mean that objectively. I do want people to be able to make movies they want to make, but there is no point to me anymore in being subtextual, except to be more artistic, which isn't a thing. Like subtext doesn't equal art. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So,
and I think, Kenny and I have had this discussion on many occasions about many different things, but I mean, I don't think that you're going to make the best art without having something to push back against you. If you don't have some sort of a box, some sort of restraint that's being put on you, and again, listen, there's exceptions to every rule. There are any number of filmmakers that have no, caveats on what they can do, and they make brilliant films. So I'm not sitting here and saying that it's impossible, but I'm saying by and large, speaking for myself anyway, notes are good. Like notes help you at least crystallize what you're trying to say, if nothing else. But so Kenny, do you want to rate this?
Yeah.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. I know when I saw this the first and only time, it was in 2002. I was living with my friends in college, and we would watch a lot of movies. Mm-hmm. And we just thought this was a cool, fun movie. So I always thought this was a great movie. I really, didn't remember any of the bigger issues at work. I thought this was a heist movie that took place in the Gulf War. So I think I always had it around an 85. Yeah. Watching this movie, it was like a stock market crashing for me in terms of my rating. In the beginning, I was like, I'm going to give this a 99. This is one of the best movies of the year. I want this to be one of the movies I put at the top. And then as I got further and further, I'm like, maybe because I basically keep a running log of what I had like an 85, then I had a 78, and I landed on a 72, which is not good. I was going to give it a 72 after this discussion. And Darren, I don't know if you know the way we do this, but we do your rating a 99, rating before the discussion, rating after discussion. After this discussion, I'm going way up. I loved this discussion. I love what this movie brings out. There's so much good here. I can't penalize it for what I think was a misstep at the end too harshly. I'm going to go all the way up to an 89. I think this is a excellent movie, and very happy that I rewatched it. I'm very happy we got to talk about it instead of me walking around the next time I talk about Three Kings being like, well, it has a lot of geopolitical implications that people can talk about. So thank you for letting me play that out of this podcast and come to this conclusion.
It's funny. We had different perspectives, but we landed at the same number. I in 99 really loved the film, similar to you, Kenny. I was pretty high on it. I probably would have given it probably even a 95. Like I thought it was, and part of that I think was a little bit of me being like, it didn't get the love in 99. So it was kind of like the movie that I could be like, this movie's fucking great. And you guys, so there was that. So I probably would have given it about a 95 back then. Watching it yesterday, I still really liked it a lot. And I probably would have had it at like a 92, if I'm being honest. I was pretty high on it. I'm at an 89 now, because I do think that, and just I know that this feels like it's minutia in terms of small numbers.
We talked you down after.
But I think that I really, you guys did help me. The ending did bump me yesterday, but I couldn't put my finger necessarily on why. I knew that there was a bunch of stuff that just wasn't all working for me. I didn't love that the prisoners were kind of almost used like a MacGuffin by the end there. Like it just didn't totally land. And so I'm at an 89 now. I still think it's one of the best films of 99. But I think that it definitely struggles with its, honestly, like the last 7 minutes or 10 minutes of the film are just tricky. It's also like, and I don't want to belabor this point, but like the fact that they're all about to be carted away. These prisoners are about to basically be killed. but then like the three of them like exchange a nod that it's okay that they give away the fucking gold. It's like, no, guys, you got to do better than this. But anyway, Darren, what did you think of it in '99? What did you think of it before? What did you think about it after?
I think now, after this conversation, feeling like it accomplishes so much in its really awesome middle. For me, it's a 90. I think it breaks 90. I think it's, I can't tell if I'm being unfair because, as you said, it's really just the last 7 minutes I struggle with, or if that just kind of sums up how ultimately damaging that part is. But even thinking about the kind of Wahlberg interrogation scenes and what they do and how much they kind of stand even apart from the movie, I think there's so much great stuff in Three Kings that really, even an awesome year for movies, I think still makes it really stand out.
This is, first of all, perhaps most importantly, Darren, thank you so much for coming on and talking about the movie with us. Cause I think that, Kenny and I we've been talking about this film for a while, how we were going to do it, and I honestly don't think it could have gone any better. I don't know about you, Kenny, but it feels like it really kind of, it hit all the sweet spots of what's great about the film, the film's flaws, so it's been really great to talk with someone who enjoys the film, but was able to kind of dig into it with us. So I really do appreciate that.
Honored to be here and honored that we were able to have a full conversation about the recent history of American imperialism right at the top. You want to get into that before the synopsis?
Just get into that.
Can't stop. I can't stop. It's crazy. I mean, no one has benefited from American capitalism more than me, and yet nobody is nobody has more vitriol towards it. It's a real horrible. I'm the worst hypocrite of them all. But hey,
But truly though, like this is the conversation about Three Kings I've wanted to have for a really long time. So thank you guys for having me. And really, again, just say to all the listeners, this is a movie that more than withstands that kind of deep read, even if the movie itself can't always follow through on what it's trying to say with those things.
I totally agree with you that, and I think Kenny would as well, that, we have put a lot of films under a microscope, obviously, on this podcast, and a lot of them can withstand it, but the truly great ones are ones like this, where you can have that type of conversation. You can understand its weaknesses and still be able to obviously suggest that it's a great film. Next week, I'm curious
before
before
Darren goes. I'm really interested to hear how hard it is to write the bullseye every week.
Well, first of all,
you don't do it anymore, right?
I do.
I know it's every month now. I know
it's every month, so that makes it.
But you were doing it weekly at some point, right?
No, I took over. All right. I took over in my weekly magazine's current monthly phase. The previous writer was Mark Snedeker, who was much funnier than I am. The bullseye is an interesting thing to work on, mainly because with a monthly publication schedule now, we're a little bit less timely than the piece used to be. I think that maybe encourages a little bit more purposefully non-topical absurdity, which I hope works for readers. But it's, let me tell you, coming up with one punchline is difficult. So coming up with 19 or 20 is an interesting ongoing challenge. But hopefully it's still kind of fun for people in its current monthly phase.
Well, I think this is a compliment. I read it last because I know that some people say they read it first. I do not, because that's not the way I operate. I always save dessert till the end, like a normal person. So I read it last. It is my favorite part of the issue. I always
too kind. That's
and
too
I know
kind.
Congratulations, because and I'm very, very happy to have you on this podcast. It really is a blast.
I too,
to be here. Thank you.
Similar to Kenny, Entertainment Weekly was a hallmark of my adolescence, and I still subscribe to the magazine. I think it's fantastic. So again,
it went monthly right when I needed it to go monthly because I have too many things, and now I can fit it in. But
we knew that this schedule would work a little bit better for orientating into your schedule. That was a big part of it. That was a big part of it.
There's this one guy.
We listened to our demographics. Okay, we know what people need.
When I moved, and I moved quite a bit in my life, the first thing I do is change my Entertainment Weekly subscription address.
It's like the only thing I think of. So I will literally be paying like gas bills on like a house ago for months and months. But
you get a hard copy of it still?
Of course,
I'm digital.
I wish I was in my room. I could show it to you. No, of course I do.
You guys are too kind. You guys are
it's on
too
my
kind,
bedside
really,
table.
Right?
My wife knows to give it to me right away.
So Darren,
long live print.
I am curious to hear your thoughts, if you have any, on the film that we're doing next week. We have Toby Herman coming on for Liberty Heights, which is the Barry Levinson film.
I've never seen it. Here's what I know about Liberty Heights, and I have to get this on the record. So one of my fantastic EW critic predecessors, Lisa Schwartzbaum, a critic who was so formative for me, and her work with Owen Gleiberman was basically where my love of movies came from. In her review of Liberty Heights, she discussed how Barry Levinson basically said she was the reason for the making of the movie because of some nasty things she said about Sphere. So I'm not sure how much of the formation of Liberty Heights was defined by that, but all I know about it is that was the movie Barry Levinson made to spite Lisa Schwartzbaum. And as critics, that's not the intention, but that's kind of something. That's something to put on your mantle if a director makes a movie to spite you.
I got to bring this full circle because this is amazing to me. You know why Sam Levinson made Malcolm and Marie?
Oh, of course.
To spite that bitch from the LA Times.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
These people are crazy. Like these Levinsons. What are you guys? Like you guys are nuts.
Yeah,
that's wild.
That's really funny.
Wild. Because that's the only time I ever heard that. The only other time I heard someone make something that was in direct response to a critic. I mean, Kevin Spacey made something in direct response to Paul Thomas Anderson, but or like I think a Ain't It Cool News
interview or something. Whatever.
But I've never heard someone so
blatantly
so blatantly affected by a critical review that they made a whole movie. But these guys did.
Man, Levinsons versus critics. It's an ongoing. It's the Hatfields and McCoys.
I don't even know. I mean, I didn't mean to say that bitch. But that's the line from the movie.
Yeah.
That bitch from New York, from the LA Times.
Do you think that it was part of the pitch? Like
Which
that
one?
Sam Levinson was like,
I'm gonna make Liberty Heights.
Well, no, I can't help but feel like
that's how he talks.
If we're talking about like Inception, the idea of like that this LA Times critic sent Sam Levinson on such a fucking, whatever you want to call it, that he needed to make this film. I refuse to believe that when he pitched the idea to someone that it didn't slip out, that there wasn't some element of being like, the critics don't get me, but like we're fucking doing, I don't know. It's the whole thing just seems insane to me.
Critics are so nice to him. I don't care what.
I know.
Like critics are so nice to him. Come on, dude. You are literally the last young white, you're the last young white nepotistic case who gets to make a movie or a TV show about a young black girl. The last one. That's the last. You're the last guy on the list, and nobody gives you shit for it. You get great critical reviews. Critics are so fucking nice to him. Yeah. I don't mean to be mean to him. I think it's a good show.
I love you for it. I think it's great. Yeah, I haven't seen
it. It's all right. I don't know if it's great or anything, but
it's fine.
I mean, listen. Anything is better than Assassination Nation.
That's what I heard. Assassination Nation was insufferable. Like you couldn't watch it.
That's like. I mean, we all had to come back from that movie.
Yeah, but the idea this guy doesn't think he gets a pass. I mean, come on, right?
I know. Thank you so much, Darren, for coming on. We hope that you'll come back in the future for something else. This was a blast, and we truly appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you guys for having me. Doing great work, continuing to go through one of the most crucial years in history. Thank you,
Darren. And please consider me for your next screen draft. Thanks.
All right, bye, guys.
Podcast like it. You want a podcast like it? 1999.